What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast.
Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. In Coin-Op Carnival news, Ryan has been making tour stops around the country, and just this past weekend he was at the VFW Pinball Show, and this coming weekend, May 15th, will be at Summit Sports, Comics, and Games at 4240 West Jefferson Boulevard, number 8 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, from 10 a.m. to noon. So stop by if you're in town, say hello, and pick up a copy of the book. In other Coin-Op Carnival news, Ryan and I were interviewed by the Michigan NPR station, and a link will be in the show notes for that. We had an interview about kind of the impetus behind the book and how we met each other and why we love pinball and all that good stuff. Sophia and I have been working on the Universal 5-star. That is coming along well. The playfield is completely cleaned, all the posts cleaned, re-rubbered, and so forth. And now we are working on polishing the metal bits, including the ball trough. The ball trough and ball lifter mechanism on this game are pretty unique and pretty cool. The ball trough is just a piece of metal that is attached to the front of the cabinet, and the ball just happens to roll down this channel, down a more substantial trough, which is perpendicular to the main trough, and from there funnels into the ball lifter mechanism. This lifter works like on a bingo pinball machine, except for the fact that it lifts a good, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 inches. It's pretty incredible. I have not seen anything like it. And it lifts straight up, so it just goes and then plops the ball right into the shooter lane. It's pretty cool. So Sophie and I managed to get that taken apart yesterday, and it needs a good, thorough cleaning, and we'll be starting on that tonight, beginning with rubbing alcohol and then following up with Mother's metal polish. Speaking of bingo pinball machines, I had a service call this weekend on two, a Bally Dude Ranch and a Bally Circus Queen. The Circus Queen had been modified. It had armor installed all around it, both steel plates, which were mounted on the sides of the head and the front of the game, and a typical angle iron cradle. So this cradle was mounted with bolts through the front and the sides, and it also had a separate iron area for the coins to go into. Pretty astounding. I don't think I've ever seen one like that where it didn't have a hopper. This one, it looks like it might have had a hopper at one time, and this was a separate coin area that it could go into, but I didn't see enough evidence of that to say for sure. Anyway, the Circus Queen had been converted from a nickel game to 5 games for a quarter, and this 5 for a quarter modification was done in a way that I hadn't seen before either. The operator had put in an extra motor, and this motor turned a stepper, essentially a stepper disc, and it would tick up 5 games, but it wouldn't play one off right away. So most of the 5 for a quarter modifications work like the later 1960s games where they had a multi-play relay that would hold in and play off the last credit. So it would hold in for the first 4 and then let go, and the last one would actually play with the start relay. This doesn't function that way, and I've found that kind of fascinating. Got everything all cleaned up, all the steppers freed and ungummied and all that good stuff, and worked through a bunch of different bugs. It had some issues with a goodly chunk of the various subsystems, but most of it was down to cleaning. It had sat for about 20 years and just needed a good thorough scrub and lubrication and all that good stuff. So the unfortunate thing was that there was a short, and the short is on the selection feature disc between that and the yellow rollover relay and the red rollover relay. These are trip relays on the trip bank, and they're supposed to trip when you hit the appropriate rollover when that feature on the selection feature disk is active. Now, the lights for these features were working completely appropriately. So the switch for the yellow rollover would only function when the light for the yellow rollover was active. Same for the red, but both relays would trip at the same time, no matter what. Didn't matter the position on the selection feature disk. If that rollover feature was active on either side and you hit the appropriate rollover, you would always get after fifth because the red rollover relay controls that automatic after fifth. So took a look, took the disk apart, made sure everything was lined up perfectly, and it still happened. Looking at the spaghetti side of the disk, I verified that everything was functional and split apart as far as it should be on that side. Match that up to the schematic, and everything is good. So unfortunately, what this leaves is there was some kind of short in the wire bundle between that selection feature disk, which is way up at the top of the backboard of the head, and these trip relays, which are all the way back on the back door. So I asked the customer if he wanted me to try to trace that down, and he said that's okay. He'll live with that. So we'll see how long until that really bugs him, because it would bug me after a while. Of course, the nice thing is it's a bug in the player's advantage, so who knows? It might be just fine. Working on these games reminded me how much I enjoy working on bingo pinball machines and how much more satisfying they can be than flipper games, because the problems are so much more challenging typically. There were a few payout problems with the screen, and got those working in short order. Essentially, the search disk was a little dirty in some positions, and got that taken care of. And the game played like a champ, except for that one issue that I did not resolve. So let's move on to the Dude Ranch. Dude Ranch was a beautiful example. Actually, it might be the nicest Dude Ranch I've ever seen in person. And that's not a game that comes up very often, at least in my neck of the woods. It's one that I have seen several times out west. I don't know why that might be, and I've seen a couple of them up north, but very few down here in the south, so I have no idea. But the artwork on that game is gorgeous, and I absolutely love it, and the gameplay is really pretty spectacular as well. So this game had sat for a while. It had thrown itself into tilt and wasn't able to start up. So I took a peek, exercised everything pretty well, cleaned a couple things, and everything was great. So that should be okay, but some of the steppers were a little gummy, so I did rebuild the ones that needed it, and that was down to the score disc, which was pretty interesting. Because the odds would step down perhaps one step on game reset, which of course it should step down all the way and then back up one. So I figured out what was going on there, and I thought it was pretty interesting. The design of the steppers in Dude Ranch is different than the later games, and this is a very early one, 1953, but the steppers were mounted horizontally instead of vertically. And I think gravity plays a little part in this story here, but there's a very strong counterspring which is wound around the center post, the center shaft of the stepper gear. And this counterspring is very powerful, like I mentioned, but if it is just a hair off too far down, it will not be able to actually push against the gear in the way that it needs to. So I kind of reset the angle of that spring, and it worked just fine. I also took the whole thing apart and cleaned it, but which it needed, but this final touch was something that I had to do separately because it was still acting kind of gummy, even though it was totally clean and well lubed and everything looked great. So just a word of caution on the earlier games. Make sure to look at those steppers. And this was my first time working on a dude ranch, so I hadn't seen these horizontally mounted steppers before. So I'm not sure if any of the other early games, like Atlantic City or maybe Coney Island, I think they're vertical. But it's been a while. So if anybody happens to know if any of those very early stepper designs are mounted horizontally in any of the games, I'd be interested to know. And you can always reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com. Today's featured game is Bally's 1935 3 in Line. Now, bingo folks will want to listen closely because this really is a cool proto-bingo type game. The holes on the playfield are arranged in a diamond pattern and score in ascending order going down the playfield from 1,000 points all the way down to 5,000 at the bottom of the playfield. At the very top of the playfield, there's a hole to light the various lamps which are arrayed around the playfield holes. That becomes more important later on. We'll discuss that shortly. Down at the bottom left and right, there are pockets for 300 and 500 points, which will also award you a consolation prize if you land too many balls in there. On the far left-hand side, there's a kickback, which is pretty cool. It's battery-powered, and this battery-powered kickback is actually functional at all times. The timer on the game only turns off the lamps. So if a ball happens to make its way down there, the game will always kick it back up and into play. I think that's a pretty cool feature. So let's talk about how you win, because there's more than just score involved in this game. You can win replays. The idea is that you want to make as many combinations of 3 in line as possible. Because the holes on the playfield are arranged in a diamond pattern, there are multiple ways to do this. In fact, the score and instruction card counts 8. So the main goal of the game is to get a certain number of 3 in lines and then hit the light hole. When you do, it'll light all the playfield lamps and you'll earn your free games. That's a pretty neat reward system. So there are several different score and instruction cards pictured on the IPDB, and I'm going to go on what I think is the default score and instruction card, but there's probably several that came with the game that you could swap it out and make adjustments in the game to handle. For 4 3 in lines and hitting the light hole, you can win 2 free games. If you get 5 3 in lines and hit the light hole, you get 3 free games. 6 3 in lines and hit the light hole, you get 5 free games. 7 with the light hole, you get 7 free games. And all 8 3 in lines and the light hole, you get 10 free games, which is pretty spectacular. You do only get 10 balls to play, so it's going to be tricky in order to make those 3 in lines, but it is doable. You have to sink all 9 in that diamond pattern and then the 10th up in the top. Now, there are consolation awards, too, as I mentioned. If you get 8 balls in the 300 and 500 holes, you get 2 free games. If you get 9 balls in the 300 and 500 holes, you get 5 free games. And if you get 9 balls in 300 and 500 and you hit the light hole, you get 10 free games. I think that idea is pretty spectacular. And obviously Bally did too. Let's hear what Billboard had to say about that feature. The article is titled Suspense on Last Ball. Last ball suspense is one of the most popular features of 3 in line, according to reports received by Jim Buckley, sales manager at Bally Manufacturing Company. The player, says Jim, may shoot 9 balls without scoring. Then his last ball, if placed in the right hole, will suddenly change a hopeless game into a high score. Another type of surprise shot on 3 in line comes when player is trying to light up the various rows of lights, and a single shot will complete not merely one, but several rows at a crack. It is this surprise shot feature that is registering with the public, and we are confident from the general reaction to 3 in line that it will have a steady run well on into the fall. This game looks like a lot of fun to play, and I certainly hope to come across it in my travels one day. That is all for tonight, though. Thank you very much for joining me. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to me on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, also at Bingo Podcast, or you can listen to me on my website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.